Welcome to Stream of Conscience, brought to you by Democracy for America, Fairfield County, where we believe that change is possible and you can make it happen. I'm your host, John Hartwell. I'm joined today by a co-host, another DFA member, Dr. Tom Hedberg of the Albert Einstein School of Medicine in New York, and Tom lives here in Norwalk. Our guests today are two members of the interfaith community here in Fairfield County. Dr. Kareem Adeeb is a Lebanese American who came here as a student. He's got a PhD in engineering, and he lectures on Islam in both Westchester and in Fairfield counties. He's on the Interfaith Council of Southwest Connecticut, and every 2 months he leads the prayers at the United Nations for the Islamic faith. And he also is the speaker of 6 languages. Dr. Adeeb, welcome to Stream of Conscience.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
And our other guest today is Rabbi Ron Fish. Rabbi Fish is with Congregation Beth. He's been here for over 10 years in Norwalk. He's a past president of the Interfaith Clergy of Norwalk, and he's also the chair of the Rabbinical Council for Westport and Norwalk. And he's working now on a doctorate in Hebrew letters. And welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So, gentlemen, obviously, in the last 10 years in this country, there's been an ongoing divide, perhaps, amongst religious people because of the attacks on 9/11 and the wars that we fought in the Middle East. And the impact, I think, on local communities of faith has sometimes taken people in places that they don't want to be. And I know that the two of you both work diligently in your communities to overcome the kinds of suspicions and ill feelings that have somehow arisen. And I'd like to spend a bit of time talking about how you work in your communities and what it is that you are focused on.
Dr. Adeeb?
Okay, I cannot say no to the rabbi. I think we have to work on 2 fronts. Within the community, we have to fight vehemently against polarization, against extremism, and try to spread moderation within the community. On the other front, you have to reach out for the moderates within the 2 other traditions. I don't think there are 3 religions. There are 1 religion, Abrahamic, and 3 traditions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. So we have to reach out to the moderates and create a united front that fights extremism, that fights polarization, and that really calls for understanding within the fraternity of humans. We have been doing for the last 6 years at Wilton Presbyterian Church once a year what we call a joint service on Sunday in October, where Rabbi Leah Cohen and Pastor Grabel and myself would pick up a topic with our 3 congregations together, and we'll address this topic on various angles, Jewish, Christian, and Islamic. And the congregations would be surprised to see we're talking the same language.
Speaking as well from a local perspective, when I was president of the Interfaith Clergy Association, Azim Mahmoud, who's a member of our community, leads the mosque, which is in Norwalk. He came to my synagogue and spoke at my synagogue, and we've begun the process of getting our communities together. There was the breakfast of Eid al-Fitr, which the synagogue was invited to participate in. I came. A small number of other members of my synagogue came as well. And there's been a growing understanding on the part of the Jewish community that there is a local Muslim congregation and community, people who are our neighbors, our customers, our doctors, and people within our midst who are part of the same family of Norwalk residents who are striving to live the lives that we all work daily to fulfill with meaning and with beauty, raising our children, teaching them the values that we hold so dear, and trying to transmit those values to the next generation. One thing I would just add is I very much echo the sentiment that there's enormous overlap between the fundamental teachings of these religions, and there are also differences. And one of the important lessons I think it's important for us to teach is that we should take seriously who our neighbors are. and neither try to paint them the colors that would define them as an enemy, God forbid, nor to paint them in such a way that we paper over differences, because there are profound and wonderful distinctions that exist among our communities. And I think it's some of those distinctions that can bring to life the fullest meaning of the American value of e pluribus unum, that we are really made greater by the diversity within our midst. So neither overlooking them so much as to make them simply a copy of who we see ourselves to be, nor coloring them as enemy, but rather appreciating them as other fellow travelers within our community.
And Rabbi, if I may, we were speaking earlier about the similarities between Hebrew and Arabic, and it's very interesting. Some viewers may not be aware of how similar the two languages actually are in terms of their evolution over time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Of course, Islam and Judaism, even more than just the etymological history of Hebrew and Arabic, Islam and Judaism have a very significant overlap. There's a form of dietary restrictions in both traditions. There is
both the halal and the kosher.
The halal and the rules of kashrut. There are requirements for fasting as a component of our traditions. There are components of giving charity, which are components of both shared faith traditions, and so forth and so on. And of course, that similarity can sometimes perhaps give rise to friction. It does it historically, and it can in the present. When you look in the mirror and see someone that looks so much like yourself with slight differences, it can produce some tension. And at the same time, there's so much one can learn from our cousins, which of course is the fundamental relationship between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
They are both Semitic. Very important to underline.
And so, in many respects, cousins.
We are cousins because Ishmael and Isaac were brothers. We are descendants of Ishmael and Isaac.
Right.
So we are cousins. In fact, I tell you a story. When I was putting my satellite, my TV satellite on my roof, the guy that came from the company, I don't want to advertise for the company, and he said, because I live next to Fairfield High, behind me the Fairfield High, I have 3 neighbors that are all Jewish. He said, what are you, a Muslim Arab living among Jews? And I said, did you forget that we are cousins?
In fact, this past Sabbath in our synagogue, we read a selection from the book of Leviticus, and I told them in the synagogue that we'd be having this discussion and dialogue. And I referenced a conversation we had last week where you talked about a contractor who did work for you. You insisted on paying before the sunset. And that literally was the reading from our Torah portion in last week's reading as well.
Well, actually, what I mentioned was immediately after the 2000, after the Trade Center.
Right.
This guy is a contractor. I had some work in my backyard. And for 8 hours, he was saying how Muslims were bad, how the Quran is an evil book. And I was looking at him. And, I got used to people criticizing you. So finally, at the end, I said, how much do I owe you? Oh, Dr. Adeeb, you recommend me to a lot of people. I said, listen, I recommend you because you are qualified, not because you're working free for me. So if you don't get money from me, I'll never recommend you. He said, okay, send you an invoice. I said, no, I want to pay you right now. If I don't pay you right now, I'm going to be upset. So came to my office and he said $800, he made a check. He said, tell me one thing. Why are you insisting on paying me right now? I said, because in my religion, God will not be pleased with me if the sweat on your forehead dries up before I pay you. He said, what's your religion? I said, Islam. You should see his face. Oh, I'm sorry. I said, for what? Well, I said, you didn't insult me. Have you ever met a Muslim? He said, no. I read the Quran? He said, no. I said, what you did not insult me. You exhibited your ignorance. It's as simple as that.
But that does go to another very significant point, I think, of commonality of the traditions, and that is, for, I think, both Dr. Adeeb and for me, service to God in some sense is meaningless if, while we are claiming to serve God, we desecrate God's image in the world. Of course, God's image is prohibited in Judaism and Islam. We're not allowed to make an image of God. That's a violation of the highest order. But there is an image of the world, and that is every human being. Every human being carries the image of God. And therefore, if we would claim to serve God while we desecrate that human fellow who carries the image of the divine, we would do disservice to God in the extreme. That's the lesson, I think, and returning back to your first comments, that I very much want to echo, and that is that we have a work to do between and within communities.
And one of the first issues that comes up there, certainly when we talk about the similarities and the unity and the companionship that we should be feeling, there is nevertheless the issue of extremism, which is what disrupts or breaks up that unity. Can you comment to some extent about where extremism is coming from and how we can potentially deal with it?
Let me just tell you a story. You always tell, even the Bible and the Quran, they always tell stories. Have you heard of Khalil Gibran?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay. He was kicked out of Lebanon, by the way. And you know why he was kicked out? He wrote parables. When he was in one of his parables, he said the priest was walking back to his village, and he saw by the side ditch, a wretched person, human being, black-faced, like covered with cold, and drowning in mud up till his neck, and extending his arm and saying, "Please, Father, help me." Father looked at him, and he had a gut feeling in him. Like he said, "Why should I help you? Tell me who you are first," which is not what a good Samaritan should do. The guy said, "Okay, I'll introduce myself. I'm Satan." And the priest said, "You want me, a man of the cloth, to help Satan?" He said, "Yes, because if I die, you'll be out of a job." These are two extremism. Remember that. Extremism breeds extremism. Extremism is a sick mind. Extremism is a reaction to fear. If you have faith, you don't have fear. The two F. Capital F is faith. Lowercase f is fear. So if you are look at the weather, it's moderate. You don't like extreme cold, extreme hot. It's moderate. Look at the world. Look at our temperature. Moderation is an innate nature of a human being. And so people that are extremists, I think they should be analyzed from a psychological point of view, because religion does not teach extremism.
But of course, extremism, we should be honest, extremism has an appeal, and that appeal is clarity. The world we live in is one of ambiguity and confusion. We in Hebrew, from a Jewish point of view, we call it hester panim. God's face is hidden in the world. And as a result, we are filled with so many aspects of our lives that seem incomprehensible, seem directionless. And people who construct, I would call it a form of an idol, an idea with absolute clarity and certainty that this idea, just like an idol, is what I serve because it is God. That is for sure the route to make yourself feel better in the short term. But it is undoubtedly the path to doing violence to the central idea that we in fact share, which is that God is greater than our minds, and that service to an idol is inherently service to something which is false. That idol could be in the form of religion, which it has been in many instances in the past, in the form of some people in their observance of Islam or Judaism or Christianity. It, of course, could be in the form of secularisms, whether it's fascism or whether it's communism. And the number of, the bodies that have been stacked up over the course of clarity in the pursuit of personal ideology is quite an extraordinary calculus of what it is to be believing in a false God.
In this country, we have, I think, an example of a person who should be examined from a psychological point of view, and I don't remember his name. He's the Christian minister down in Florida who was threatening to burn the Quran a few months ago, and at the same time then he tried to trade off not burning the Quran against stopping the project in Lower Manhattan that people were referring to as the mosque, which really wasn't a mosque, it was a community center at the site of 9/11. How is it that, what can we do as a larger society to work against people like that and the fears that they feed on?
Let me say one thing. I want to go back to extremism strives during time of economic distress, because when you have an economic distress, you are afraid of the future. So extremism comes with fear all the time. When you are afraid, you go back. They say religion and nationalism are the last bastion of the scoundrel,
Right.
and which is the case. In this case, I remember one of my members, they came on a Sunday, because we meet every Sunday, and she said, Dr. Adeeb, you know, this guy in Florida, he's doing, what can we do? I said, nothing. Nothing, we don't do anything. This guy wants to, he wants to have, you know, exposure and what have you. Nothing. She said, what do you mean? I said, the guy, if he has read the Quran, read what the Quran says about Jesus and Mary and Moses, he will not burn it. So actually, people like this, they are followed, and you know, those who are extremists, they are for two reasons. Either they are afraid, or they have an agenda. And right now, if, for example, bashing Islam does not give any votes, nobody would attack Islam. So actually, the attack of Islam is good to get votes. And it happened with the Jews, with the Italians, with the Poles, with everybody that came to this country.
The good news about this lunatic in Florida is, honestly, except for the fact he's brought up often as a point of conversation, he's not that consequential.
No.
And
except when he gets the platform in the national
right, well,
media.
somebody wants to. I mean, the media chooses to use him to have a
Right.
great show.
Well, that was his intention to begin with, most likely.
Exactly.
Sure.
I would worry about the bigotries which reside in people's hearts, that they're sort of less upfront about. The bigotries which are present in many instances, in many communities, perhaps even our own, where people look across and see a neighbor who looks or prays differently, and they wonder, what does this suggest about my safety? Now, those bigotries may be rooted in fears that are not entirely without foundation, but I think the best thing to do is to get to know one another, to reach out, and to learn. One of the things that I think is important to note also is that at the same time that this horrible, Quran burning episode has taken place in Florida, there's also been the reaction to the cartoons which came up with
Right, I was going to
depicting
raise
Muhammad,
that, yes.
in fact, responses to the burning of the Quran, which involved riots where people were killed. Those kinds of extremisms are profoundly, profoundly disturbing. Not that anybody should insult another religion, but we should be clear that the desecration of a human life under any circumstances is the greatest desecration of God's name.
Well, I would like to bring the fact that in the Judeo-Christian concept, we are created to the image of God. In Islam, God has no image. So there is the spirit of God in every person. If there is the spirit of God in every human being, or the image of God reflected in every human being, how do you dare demonize something that has some divinity in it?
And yet it seems so easy to be, it's done all the time.
Well, you don't attack, you demonize them before you attack them.
Yes,
Demonize
of course.
people, because then you feel that morally you're justified in doing whatever you do.
And they become less of a human
exactly
in your eyes.
They humanize people.
Sure. One of the
They
issues-
become part of the landscape. They're not humans anymore.
One of the issues that we've seen lately that may feed into the fear and into the prejudice that's been become endemic to some areas of the U.S. lately is an email campaign where certain lies are promulgated about what Islam is actually all about and what the intention of Muslims are to the United States at large. Would you care to comment about that too?
I made a sermon at the United Nations. I said, I want you all delegates to contact your governments instead of having riots. Let some scholars write a book about the qualities of the Prophet, translate it into 80 languages and distribute it free. It costs you less than paying reparations for the people who were hurt by the demonstration. In fact, in Islam, it says, they said an expression of anger. There is no expression of anger in Islam. The Prophet, peace be upon him, has said, if you get angry, keep quiet. Keep quiet. So if you're sitting, sit down. So he said, don't get angry. He said, don't express your anger. Now to your question, I had an experience at Southern Connecticut State University. I was asked to come and talk about God of Islam compared to God of Christianity. And then I found out that they got somebody, a Copt from Egypt, instead of talking about God of Christianity, was attacking the Prophet all the time. And I saw the Muslim members in the audience getting upset. So finally I said, this is time for evening prayer. I want all the Muslims to follow me to a room. And we went to the room. I said, listen, if you get upset, leave. I don't want any violence, because we walked into a trap. I saw a lot of TV cameras. I saw a lot of reporters outside waiting for some melee to happen, and then suddenly the headline would be, Muslims getting angry about hearing about Christ. I don't want this to happen. We came back, and some people left. And what happened was, one guy who was leaving, he said, a couple told him, why are you leaving? He said, I can't take it. He said, please, your guy is doing very well. When you have something like that, these are minority. Don't address them. It is those who are not informed that you have to educate them. To me, when you disagree with me, you're not educated in my point of view. You're not my enemy. I don't feel anybody is my enemy. Because when you take enemy, it creates negative feelings within you. If you have to be positive in all your thinking. So if I'm positive, he attacked the Prophet, I stuck to my subject. It's as simple as that.
I think I understood the question to be addressing the issue of Sharia law to some degree and how that's represented in the public mind.
Right.
And I can tell you from the perspective of the Jewish experience, there's an interesting duality here. On the one hand, we are extraordinarily grateful to live in the United States, where the value of the separation of the religious dimension of life from the secular dimension of life, it allows every religious community to flower and develop on their own. Just take a look at the US versus some of the countries in Europe where there is no such separation. You can see our religious life here is much more abundant. We don't have on both sides of the equation, we don't have the infusion of religious doctrine into public life, despite perhaps what some religious political leaders would like to see, nor do we have the intrusion of politics into religious life, and both really benefit as a result. And that's one side of the coin. And in that sense, it's sort of silly to say that Sharia law or halakha is a threat to our democratic constitutional system, because the Constitution prohibits the establishment of religion. One couldn't do that. But there is another side to the equation, and that is we all bring our values, our most deeply held values, to the public square. And in a democracy, those public squares are filled with individuals who are influenced by their religious traditions. And so our religious traditions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, profoundly ethical atheists, profoundly ethical Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, they all come to the central square with their values. And that is as it should be. And it is not from the requirement of sameness that we enter that public square, but it is in fact with our difference. That makes for a messy public square. And in that sense, Sharia law or Islam and its values should be part of the dialogue about how we achieve the values and goals of our society. One of the things that troubles me is people who hold up Ayn Rand as an economic and political figure to be modeled after. She argued that all religious values were a desecration of this holy thing called the market. And individual interest was the only thing that was of value. Well, she's allowed to bring that value to the public square, but I'm allowed to bring my value, that my life is made holier in my caring for another human being. I'm allowed to bring my set of values about what I believe should be the priorities of a society as we expend our resources. And I'm sure the same is true for Dr. Adeeb. And so in that sense, I welcome Islam with its emphasis on zakat as being part of the dialogue within the public sphere as well.
You have spoken very eloquently. I couldn't have said it any better, but let me say two comments. It is not the intent of the Muslim to bring Sharia law into the US. And if they want, they cannot. It's because everything is democratic. In Islam, whenever you go to a country, it's your duty as a Muslim to obey the laws of the country. If you don't like it, leave. It's mentioned in the Quran. It said you are weak, and God said, well, in there are other parts of the world where you can go and emigrate. So, and Sharia law is not a law, it's just divine principles. It's like the Constitution. It's the interpretation of Sharia, whether it's the Taliban or the Wahhabi or the Saudis or the Americans. That's where you try to interpret God's words with your limited mind. And let's say that I went to school in Louisiana. Until the 50s, segregation was justified by religious interpretations. So what's it? Sharia law should never scare people.
Oh.
Sharia law forbids the Muslim to drink. How many accidents are we saving? Just through that.
We only have a few minutes left. And one of the issues here in Norwalk is the siting of the mosque that wants to be built very near to, not next door obviously to your congregation, but very close by in the same part of town. And I know that in the old days we would place houses of worship in the center right where people lived, and of course people would walk or they would come and buy.
Some of us still walk.
Some of us still walk. But how is it that we can work these issues out so that people are accommodating and yet their own local desires are somehow taken into account?
I can tell you, as a resident of Norwalk for 10 years, we have an extraordinary, diverse, beautiful city with so many different communities that make up who we are. I visit congregants of mine in Catholic sponsored institutions when they are in need of convalescence. I visit with different factions and pieces of the community at different times. Thanksgiving, we have a beautiful interfaith Thanksgiving service that brings together people from all different communities and walks of life. With this year, for the first time, we had the Sikh community involved. We had really just an extraordinary outpouring of support from all quarters. I have no doubt the mosque will be built at some point, somewhere, somehow. I don't know enough of the details about the conflict that's gone on in the public discussion. I know that Norwalk is a place for everybody, including the Muslim community. And even among the people who are concerned about the mosque right now, there are plenty of them who would be very happy to see a mosque built. They have issues with the traffic pattern, and I'm not going to get into all that. But this is a community in which Islam is welcome, in which our Muslim neighbors are respected, and in which we need to reach out to one another for understanding in those inevitable moments when there is misunderstanding across divides that are unfamiliar.
Well, I want to thank both of you for coming in this afternoon. It's been a great conversation. Rabbi Fish, Dr. Adeeb, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Best of luck in all that you do. Tom, thank you very much for helping set this up.
Thank you so much.
And perhaps we can do this again.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wow. Shalom alaikum. I wish you the best, and we should not be scared of each other. We're all human beings. We come from Adam and Eve. This should trump any other thing.
I agree.
Agreed.
Thank you. That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. You can find all our shows on YouTube by going to youtube.com/user/DFATVNet. We're also on Facebook and Twitter. Or you can send comments or suggestions for a show to info@dfa-tv.net. If you'd like to learn more about progressive political action, we meet at 7 p.m. on the first Wednesday of the month at the Silver Star Diner in Norwalk. We'd love to have you join us. Remember, change is possible, and you can make it happen. This has been Stream of Conscience, and I'm your host, John Hartwell. Thanks for watching.